Welcome to Investing in Integrity. I'm Ross Overline, CEO and co-founder of Scholars of Finance, a rapidly growing organization on a mission to inspire character and integrity in the finance leaders of tomorrow. If you're an investor, finance professional, or student aspiring to make an impact with capital, this show is for you. Investing in Integrity brings you conversations with leading minds in finance to help you learn how you can make finance a force for good by investing in integrity. On today's episode, we have the privilege of speaking with Jamie Kase, the global head of investor relations and managing director at HarbourVest. HarbourVest is a global investing firm headquartered in Boston, Massachusetts, managing over $140 billion in assets across primary investments, secondary investments, credit, and infrastructure. They have really long-standing partnerships with a number of top investing firms and GPs, and a renowned firm in the secondaries markets, especially. Jamie runs investor relations there. After several decades in Wall Street, top financial firms in investing relationships, client relationships, sales and marketing, leadership roles, he's now run investor relations at HarbourVest for a decade and really grown the firm significantly over the last 10 years into the behemoth it is today. Jamie's son, Kobe, was a member of Scholars of Finance, joined SOF at Brown University as a freshman in college, and all the way through senior year has remained very involved, and this summer will be starting his full-time employment post-college. And Kobe actually became the president of our Brown University chapter of SOF and did a lot of work to make that site of SOF really successful and impactful. This is a really special conversation. This is the first time that we've had a supporter of SOF who's also the parent of a student in SOF on the podcast. And during this conversation, we covered a lot of ground. First, starting with Jamie's story, we talk a lot about investor relations, sales, relationship building, really getting into some nuances of authentic relationship building in the business world and building really trusted partnerships. We then shift into leadership, especially leadership in uncertain times or turbulent times, which we are in today, with a lot of fast-paced change and a lot of unknowns, right? Both in the US and in the global markets. So we talk about how we can lead our companies, we can lead our team, how we can be strong ourselves through times of uncertainty. And then lastly, we get to talk a bit about Kobe, and we get to hear from Jamie's perspective as a parent, the impact that SOF had on his son. And then he shares a bit about, for other parents out there who are listening, how to support your son or daughter who want to enter financial services and want to do that with a mission and purpose, who want to do that in a values-based way. And he ends with some advice for our students and young professionals listening on how you can set yourself up for success, growing your career as well. So with that, I thought this conversation was extremely insightful. I will be listening to it again to take notes on what Jamie said, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Without further delay, here is Jamie Kase. Jamie, it is such a pleasure to have you on the Investing in Integrity podcast today, sir. We have so much ground to cover. First, how are you and where are you calling in from?
Ross, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this, and I am so excited to be here with you today. I'm in New York City in my dad's apartment.
Seeing the family today, getting a little bit of time with dad?
Trying to do so, yes. 95-year-old gentleman, so.
I see. Probably a little bit of support and lots of love too.
Absolutely. Both ways, though, still.
Of course. Well, thank you for fitting us in while you're spending time with your dad. Jamie, that almost feels apropos for this conversation because your son, Kobe, was the president of the Brown University chapter of Scholars of Finance. And so there seems to be this growing intergenerational case partnership with SOF.
That's actually great. And, look, you're talking to me about leadership. You should be talking to my dad about it as well. So he's taught me a lot and he's taught our kids a lot.
With that, let's dive in. I have so many questions. Excited to talk to you about leadership, especially leadership in uncertain times, just given what's going on in the US and the world around us and the markets, to talk about investor relations, what you do today at HarbourVest, and to talk about Kobe a little bit and hopefully some wisdom that you might have for other parents with young adults wanting to enter financial services. I wanted to first start off with just asking you to share your story of your journey, life and career for our listeners.
I'll start with a shortened version, Ross, because I'm old. And you can add to it or add questions to it to fill in some of the blanks. So when I graduated college a long time ago, I really didn't know what I wanted to. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. I decided to be a paralegal. I really didn't enjoy that. It was too much studying and not enough doing. And I got an opportunity to go into investment banking. And I really fell in love with the work and the engagement with clients. From there, I went to work in derivatives sales, and there were themes that run through this history. And I had a long career in derivatives, culminating with a senior role in Asia for Lehman Brothers. And then I went to the asset management side to run sales in asset management. And I've continued to run sales and sales organizations, global organizations for a variety of firms until my arrival at HarbourVest about 10 years ago, where I'm responsible for investor relations worldwide for the firm.
Jamie, thanks for an incredibly succinct summary of a long and illustrious career. Would love to hear a little bit more just about, for our younger listeners, your college experience, that sort of time in college, and kind of how you thought about starting your career, that early journey.
So we started talking about my dad, and it's apropos because it's related to my journey. My father was dean of a medical school, and so the idea of being a doctor ran deep in our family. And so I was pre-med when I got to college, and after a few years, I realized that that was not really a path I wanted to take. I had to then figure out what to do next. And I was really, quite honestly, a bit lost. Fortunately, I was at Brown, which is a very comforting environment and allows people to be lost. And I was able to graduate successfully. And then it led to the first job as that paralegal, and then ultimately a job on Wall Street. So college was a place of Brown encourages independence. And I really didn't have the organizational skills to be truly independent. So I was very lost there. But you look back on that experience and you realize that being lost is okay. And you actually can learn tremendously from that experience and apply it on an ongoing basis.
Can you unpack that more? Talk about what it looked like if you once were lost and now are found, to quote a song that I'm sure many of us have heard and loved. What was it like in that period of being lost, and how did you find your way?
So it's very scary, right? Because if you're on a pre-med track, you know exactly what your goal is and where your end game is. And if you suddenly depart from that and you really don't know what you want to do, it's very unsettling. And at any of these outstanding universities in which SOF is affiliated with, you find yourself amongst other students and other buddies who are very focused. And so it can really scare you. And for me, I think that's why I immediately tried to grab onto the next thing. That was the lawyer thing because it was easy, it was obvious, and it was a clear path and had an end game. But the key was, I will never forget this moment, Ross. I was a paralegal in New York and I was working for a high-powered Wall Street firm. And, the paralegals were in an office space across the street from where the lawyers were, and there was food out for the lawyers. So it was 8 o'clock at night. I went over to see if there was some extra food, and it was one of those marble lined corridors. And I was walking down the corridor and I passed an interior office where asleep at the desk were two 7-year associates. And I realized that was not going to be my life. And I was very fortunate that we were working on a very large merger and acquisition involving some of the largest corporations in America at the time, and every investment bank was involved. And so I was able to read the depositions of these investment banks and learn what their backgrounds were, what they did for a living, and how they thought about the transaction. And it clicked in me. I said, I want to do that. That connectivity to a client actually was so strong through the depositions, and it triggered something in me that has never left. I am a client person. And that was the moment where things turned on.
What is it about working with clients and working with people that you've enjoyed so much? Tell us more, A, and B. I'm kind of curious how your work with clients has evolved, right? You went from sales to investor relations. There's a bit of a Venn diagram between the two, of course. Can you talk about how your work with clients has evolved?
There's a constant, and that is, for me at least, if you are able to establish a trusted relationship with your client where they view you as a partner, they will share their strategic needs and objectives with you with the full confidence that you will endeavor on their behalf to bring your firm to bear on their success and their needs. And In investment banking, that's what great investment bankers do. They're close to those CEOs, they understand needs and objectives, and they bring their firm. In derivatives, it's the same thing. If you understand the risks the client wants to take and the risks they don't want to take, you can help solve those problems for them. And in asset management, there are investment objectives that they're trying to achieve, and you can bring your capabilities to bear to help them. But it goes beyond that. It's really helping them think about all aspects of their business. And so as I've grown more in experience and seniority, the nature of trusted bonds hasn't changed at all. The challenges and needs and the objectives of a client are far more complex the more senior you become. And you have to really think carefully about your ability to deliver against those. So that is the constant. And I believe that I think we're all in sales at every part of everything we do. And so it always comes down to this personal interaction, the personal interaction you and I have established and our trusted relationship and what that leads to. And I think that's a constant in our industry and a constant in the world.
It begs a number of questions for me. First, and I would imagine for our listeners too, I want to sort of follow up here in a way that might be relevant to everyone. So we have a lot of senior executives listening. I routinely get texts or emails from C-suite, partner, board level, IC level leaders at different firms, and students listen. All the way down to 18 and 19-year-olds are members that we serve at SOF through our core leadership programs. And it's interesting because students, until they really understand how finance in the world works, they all think, sales is a pejorative term. It's a used car salesman. It's someone who couldn't get a real job. They don't realize that the way that someone in investment banking went from analyst to associate to then VP, maybe principal, ED, MD is through sales. They were able to source deals and build relationships and bring revenue into the firm, right? And bring deals in that then the analysts and associates and interns help do all the legwork on. And that oftentimes, Larry Fink at BlackRock is tapped to stop into major client meetings for 5 or 10 minutes and say hi all the time because they want to see him when you're managing billions of their dollars, right? And so I think for, more senior people listening, for myself, I'll speak for myself perhaps. There have been times when I've wrestled with, like, how do you make the distinction between a transactional interaction, right, and a real relationship? I've heard the term real friends and deal friends before used to try to make this distinction. Like, how do you think about when you have goals, when you have corporate objectives, right, and there's real economic incentives, how do you think about sort of the distinction between like a transaction and a relationship? And how do you think about forging like real and authentic, like genuine interpersonal relationships in a business context when there is all of this, real transactional nature behind the work we're doing?
It's a great question. So for me, it really boils down to the clarity of the interaction. So I have a very keen sense when a client is opening up to me and connecting with me, and I am connecting with them, sometimes at a personal level, sometimes at a professional level, and how that contrasts with a situation where that's not happening. And when it's not happening, you can feel that it becomes quite transactional. And when it does happen, it's actually the opportunities, the transactions that emerge from it actually emerge as a matter of just the outcome of the discussion as opposed to the subject line for the discussion. And so you can feel it innately as it's unfolding. For me, it's a comfort level. If I feel that I'm connecting with the individual on a highly personal level, I know that that will translate to a professional partnership. Whereas if I am not connecting, and that could be two ways. It could be because of me. It could be because of them. It will solely be a transactional relationship. There's nothing wrong with that, but it becomes very clear to me during the process. And maybe it's partially, Ross, because of years and years of experience of seeing that unfold. When you know where the client is only about price, or the client really wants to outline significant issues in their business, and price doesn't become a subject until the very end.
Right. It's so interesting. In my own experience personally, I'll use fundraising, the money that we've raised for Scholars of Finance. We've raised almost $10 million at this point. We'll cross the $10 million mark probably in the next quarter, if not the next at the latest. We're really proud of that. And obviously, I'm super grateful to you and all of our supporters and all of our partners that make that possible. In my own experience, I've definitely seen this where I get on a call with a donor and we talk about their kids, their family, our health. They ask about Maya, my wife, how's she doing after the breast cancer? Like, it was a real deep relationship. And then we quickly talk about SOF or like work for 5 to 10 minutes and we nail down 6 next steps and we're good. But then there are plenty of calls you get on where you say, hey, how are you doing? And it's, I'm good. What do you want to talk about today? There's no interest in a relationship. I'm curious, how do you view those different types of relationships? How do you handle and treat the person that wants to build a relationship versus how do you handle and treat the person that just wants to get right to it? Is it just meet them where they're at?
So in the past, it was I would meet them where they're at. Now I have the luxury of choice and I can actually have somebody else on the team cover some of those other clients because I do my best work when I'm a trusted partner. And so that's the highest and best value I can add to HarbourVest by doing that with certain clients. And if the client doesn't want to have that with me, there are other people in the company that are probably better capable of serving that client. But if that client really wants to have that strategic partnership with me, then we create all sorts of interesting opportunities together for each other. And so that I truly migrate towards those other relationships now. Notwithstanding that the transactional ones are still important, we just have other people on the team who can do that very effectively.
So in short, you don't like the quick, let's get right to it type, and you can just delegate that to somebody else or not work with that person.
So when I ran equity derivatives in the past, we had a flow desk and a structured derivative desk. And the flow desk was you'd be talking to hedge fund clients all day long who were trading. And then the structured desk, you were solving complex structured transactions with a client. And my bias was always to migrate towards the structured desk. I just wasn't good at that flow activity.
I've got to say, I honestly find it so draining to try to do business with people who don't want to build a real relationship where it's personal, there's trust. I just find it exhausting. This actually happens with some firms. We'll have a relationship with the CEO of the firm or, a member of management committee and we're friends and they're a mentor. And then we meet the recruiting team and it's just like, what's your ROI? What are your numbers? We're just like a vendor to them. It has been really nice to have members of my team who can manage those particular relationships.
And some people are really, really good at doing that too.
I hear that. And thank God that we have those kinds of people on our teams. I wanted to ask a 2-part question about investor relations for our younger listeners and then for our more experienced listeners. For someone who doesn't know what investor relations is, 18 or 19-year-old college student or a first-year analyst or second-year analyst or maybe an associate who still has never learned what investor relations really does in detail, can you give like just the high level anyone can understand summary of your role leading investor relations at HarbourVest? And B, more experienced listeners, the LPs listening, the GPs listening, who know what you do day to day and maybe are doing it too. Sort of any common misunderstandings or things that you would want to share with other senior leaders about how you think about investor relations that, maybe isn't typical.
So you'll see a theme here that unfolds. So investor relations at my level is being responsible for all our client related activities at HarbourVest and ensuring that all of the people who work for me who deal directly with our clients, both prospects and existing clients, receive from those individuals all of the resources of the firm they need to help them achieve their objectives. So my job is to make sure that my IR people, whether they're in Japan, in Australia, in Korea, in Colombia, in the UK, or in Frankfurt, are able to get access to everything that we do in a timely, thoughtful way and in a manner that works for their clients. So that's my job. Now, in a nutshell, investor relations is really about client coverage and bringing the firm to the client. So it's sales, it's service, it's support. At HarbourVest, I think about that very concretely. If we have established that sales is about having that trusted partnership relationship with a client, then the way I think about the investor relation person's role is they are the front of a vector into HarbourVest, and they are the direct line into the client. The client knows that this individual, this IR professional, is their point of access and engagement with the firm. And the vector is everybody else in the firm. And so that IR professional is the business champion for that client into the organization. They're the relationship manager who ensures that all the touch points of the firm that need to be established are established, that the strategy is engaged properly, and that the needs of the client are met. And sometimes that investor relations person could control every aspect of the conversation with the client. Sometimes the investor relations person could say, no, general counsel, you need to have a relationship with general counsel at client. HR head, you need to have a relationship with HR head. Keep me informed as those conversations are unfolding, but let me draw those people together and introduce them and let them do their jobs.
Jamie, it's interesting. I'm really curious. What do you feel like are some of the sort of misconceptions or things that are oftentimes misunderstood by other senior leaders about their IR function, or maybe their firm doesn't have one, and they just don't know?
So I think that there was a article written long ago by a really good friend of mine by the name of Jim Ware from Focus Consulting. And it's about the three tribes of asset management. There's salespeople, there are investment people, and there are operations folks. The best firms have these three organizations working together, recognizing that they're very different types of personalities. And so there's a common misperception around salespeople. They don't understand the underlying investment capability or product. They're really just door openers, and all they do is introduce the firm. They are unable to answer the detailed questions. They immediately transition it to the knowledge expert in the organization, whether it's the operational infrastructure or the investment people. And the reason that's a common misperception is that in private equity, in the old days, with funds raised every 3 or 4 years, there was actually no need for a point person to cover a client on a daily basis. Those days are gone. And so the investment professionals were able to do that and do that very, very successfully because they do understand the underlying. The best investment professionals are outstanding relationship people because that's how they do deals. And so they were able to do this without a sales organization or a service organization. And that doesn't exist anymore because there's daily interaction with clients. There is the need to have this group of people who actually are quite skilled at that engagement dynamic with client. The second common misperception is that the salespeople really are just aggressive product pushers. And again, the best salespeople, the best IR professionals are not that at all. They're bringing the firm to the client. And so those misperceptions do yield a view that they're hired guns. They're not really loyal to their company. And that's the farthest thing from the truth because, again, client will not have a trusted partnership with you if they don't feel that you're working on their behalf in their best interests in partnership with your organization.
That's so helpful. I'm extrapolating all of this in our work at SOF. We just brought in, I guess now, the time of this recording, about 6 months ago, brought in Miguel Guadalupe, our new vice president of community development, really tasked with bringing SOF to all of the executives and firms and professionals who believe in this mission and want to support the next generation. Partnerships, marketing, fundraising. Robert O'Brien, our senior director of mission advancement, who is responsible for bringing SOF to executives and professionals who want to engage as speakers, mentors, supporters, donors, advisors, etc. What have you learned, or what advice might you have for some of the more senior folks listening on sort of managing and leading relationship builders, right, in your organization, and any key advice you'd give those frontline relationship builders on the other side? Kind of pro tips?
Russ, is a great question, and it's really hard because what makes one great investor relations person successful is utterly different from what makes another. And so there are two critical elements as a sales leader that you must be able to think very carefully about. The first is that if you try to hire people all in your own image, you're going to fail. And so what you need to do is discern what makes that individual great and special, even if it's different from what you do and how you do it. And that means you're going to have a collection of differences on your team. And I'm a huge fan of differences. I think differences creates a incredibly rich environment when pulled together. Then you as sales leader, your biggest challenge is making them work together as a partnership, as a team, because 1+1 with great people who work together is always going to be more than 2. And if you've got 10 of them, it could be worth 20. And so the hardest part is figuring out how to weave those folks together. So you have to find the right people who've got skill sets that could be different from yours and approaches that are different from yours. But when married together with the rest of the team, becomes a really powerful engine for success.
Jamie, I should have asked at the beginning of this call for our listeners who aren't familiar with HarbourVest, where you're doing this type of work. Can you just give like the 60 seconds on HarbourVest, the size of the firm, AUM, kind of strategy?
So simple facts on HarbourVest is that we are a private partnership fully owned by the partners of the organization. We've been in existence about 42 years now. We manage over $140 billion in assets for our clients around the world, and I mean literally around the world, in 14 offices. We're about 1,300 employees. We manage primary relationships on the private equity side, secondary relationships on the secondary side, co-investment alongside our general partners, infrastructure, and credit.
Okay, thanks. Incredibly succinct and really helpful. Your point about your firm being global and really having global relationships, I think neatly segues into something that I wanted to talk to you about today: leadership in uncertain times. At the time of this recording, it was just recently that Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky had the fated meeting in the Oval Office that everybody who's paying attention seemed to watch, myself included. Any opinions on our administration aside, politics aside, right? Just totally neutral question. The reality is there's a lot of uncertainty right now, but there's a lot of change, right? The new administration is in a lot of ways that I support, and in some ways that give me pause or I'm concerned with. The new administration has been driving more change at a faster pace than anybody domestically or abroad has been used to over the last number of years, maybe decades. I think there's something to be said for moving fast, and there's a lot of benefit to just moving fast and getting things done when there's so many problems to solve. As a founder or CEO, I really appreciate that. But as a founder CEO, I'm also wrestling with, like so many people, like, what does this mean for my organization? What does this mean for my team? How do I lead my people through this uncertain time when there's all this volatility? And I wanted to ask you, first, how do you think about managing and navigating your company, the organization, as a leader there, through just the sort of uncertain environment that we're in? And then second, taking from that broad view, how do you then think about leading your team, your direct reports, their direct reports through uncertain times, through turbulent times?
So for us at HarbourVest, and for me personally, there is a constant in change, is that there's always going to be change. And so as a leader, what we believe we need to do is create a safe space for our people to operate to the best of their abilities inside our walls. And so we're a highly transparent organization. We're incredibly ambitious. We hold each other deeply accountable to our successes, but we also care deeply for each other and how we're operating in difficult and challenging times. I recall the first day that we were all able to dial into a Teams call during the beginnings of the COVID epidemic. And our CEO looked into the camera and said to everybody who was on that call on that day, we had about 900 employees, and said, if you are on this call and are listening to me, your job is safe and secure. You do not need to worry. And that was a very powerful moment, because if you recall, people were very afraid. Roommates were getting fired. It was really uncertain. And creating that calm, this place is safe environment really engendered unbelievable loyalty and support for us. And as leaders, we need to create that environment on a regular and daily basis, even through uncertainty, even through difficult times. And so that's core of what we do. And then I think the key is being calm oneself, right? From the top, if you come across as uncertain, scared, unable to make any decisions, not able to stand in front of your team and try to provide a degree of clarity, even reconciling to the fact that things are uncertain, which is okay, and being vulnerable, which is also okay. But that confidence and inspirational leadership does wonders to have your people then manage through these difficult times. The next thing that I tell all of my salespeople is whenever there is uncertainty, that is the time you need to be on the phone talking to your clients. Even if they're not going to do a thing because they're standing still, looking in the headlights, they need to be talking to you. They want to have that warm voice at the other end of the phone, even if they can vent or even if they can articulate that they're not doing anything. And they remember who was there when times were difficult and challenging. Now, clearly, this kind of an environment worldwide creates lots of great investment opportunities. And there are some clients leaning in, and then there are some clients just literally sitting back. But engaging with them and talking through how they're approaching these difficult times or these changing times, I think is really the key.
Jamie, I'm curious how you think about engaging with clients and, different relationships during these uncertain times when everyone is just busy and are maybe stressed, are trying to figure out what it means for their firm, for their team, for their portfolio, for their personal life. On one hand, I'm feeling this right now personally. We're going to be reaching out to a lot of our advisors and donors soon to ask for advice on how to navigate the new administration, how to do this. I also want to be really sensitive. One of our major donors just kicked off a fundraise, to raise many, many billions of dollars in a new fund. And it's a 12-month process. And I'm like, I actually don't want to bug him right now. He's just started a global fundraise in a time of global uncertainty. How do you strike that balance, being there during times of uncertainty while also recognizing these people are stressed and busy, maybe especially as it pertains to like new business and fresher relationships?
I think part of it is if you have a deeply established partnership already, then you know exactly how you can help that individual client. So in your scenario, it may be that all he wants is an email from he or she wants is an email from you saying, hey, good luck. I know you're kicking off this critical fundraise for yourself. I'm here if you want to just brainstorm on what it's like out there and how tough it is, or you just want a shoulder to talk to that's outside of your universe. For me, I look at the things that we have inside our organization that are invaluable to a client in a time of stress. Portfolio construction tools, cash flow tools, quantitative analysis, and simply being able to talk to somebody sometimes is just a really great thing. Or I have a problem in my portfolio. What can I do about it? Well, let me get you on the phone with Ian Lane, who is deeply involved in that industry and knows the companies in that sector incredibly well for us. And just connecting the dots. Again, people are very busy, Ross, but they always want to connect the dots with people who care about them.
How would you maybe shift the advice or, what nuance is there for people who are younger, earlier in their career? As I'm listening, I'm thinking for myself, it's one thing when my relationship manager who manages billions of dollars for me calls, like, of course I'm going to answer that call. But, what if you're a college student trying to recruit into the industry during this time? What if you're that second year analyst and really want to move into private equity and you're trying to network? What if you run a nonprofit organization and are trying to make sure you keep growing your funding? Like, what if you're not at the very top of someone's list necessarily in all circumstances? How do you think about it then? Or what advice might you give those folks?
So I think that the most important piece of advice is that you don't stop being who you are and you don't stop going after these opportunities, because there will be hiring decisions. There will be dollars that people are going to put to work or to donate. There are going to be decisions made. And if you assume that, oh, they're too busy, they don't want to talk to me, I guarantee you they're talking to somebody else. And so you have no choice. You just have to recognize, and you have to do it cautiously and thoughtfully and carefully. I know you're terribly busy. However, I'd really love to get in front of you. Or it really behooves the networker who's done the extra bit of diligence to know the friend of the friend of the friend of that person you want to get to actually say, is now a good time or a really, really bad time? And what are sort of the key elements that I can use to get to that individual when I might not have been able to before? It's going to be hard. You are definitely going to get more rejections in times of uncertainty like this when people are like, oh, I don't even know if I'm going to be able to hire anybody. I don't need to even waste my time. But you're going to find some chord that's going to connect. And then you also should recognize that there are going to be people like me who are going to remember what it was like when I was in their shoes and how scared I was and how difficult it was to get that call returned. And I'm going to say, you know what? I'm just going to take this call because I know it's going to make a difference for that person.
Just recently, as you know, in Silicon Valley, and I went and spoke to our Stanford chapter, and several of the students afterwards, like a half dozen students from that talk, reached out to ask for some time, ask for some advice, and I'm obliging all of them. Like, yes, I'm here. If it weren't for, my mentors, you and other supporters of SOF, I don't know where I'd be today. It was that very pay it forward phone call that, and many of those that changed my life and trajectory. So again, I feel that same obligation to do it. I appreciate you sharing that. I hope that anyone listening in this community of scholars of finance, feels that obligation, at least with other members of this community and scholars of finance, like you and me.
But again, I would say, Ross, that SOF is an ideal platform, right? Because you've got these opportunities for your chapters to create networking opportunities. I get a call from a school asking me to do something with them. I always say yes. And that's partly because of you and partly because of my son's experience. But I'm always going to say yes. That creates an opportunity for however large that chapter is to be in front of me and to engage with me and to then have a follow-up connectivity opportunity with me. It's all in their hands. I think you've created an unbelievable platform for these students.
We built it together. I think a lot of the people listening to this conversation have helped build this platform and the community. I'm very grateful for that. Speaking of your son, Kobe, I want to pivot to Kobe a little bit. He helped build this community, right? He helped build this organization in a lot of ways, from joining SOF at Brown to becoming the president of the chapter, offering feedback to our national team on our strategy and our plans. I was more than happy to help Kobe in his recruiting process, get into finance. And of course, now he's landed very, very well. I'm curious, how has Kobe's involvement in Scholars of Finance influenced or led you to think about your own values, your own leadership practices? And then I'm also curious to hear kind of what changes you've observed in Kobe as a result of his time in SOF, how you believe it helped prepare him for his future.
So let's start with what you did for him. So he is freshman at Brown. He thinks he wants to follow in dad's footsteps, but he wants to way exceed him in so many ways. He's got incredible goals for himself, and he's fishing around looking for how can he make a difference. And somehow or other, he found SOF, or you found him. He got involved, and then you asked him, or somebody asked him to help with the future of that chapter. And that leadership opportunity, first off, the confidence that was created in him, that somebody had confidence in him to do that without any real experience, was awesome, because he then grabbed that and ran with it. And as he could see the changes unfolding, it had huge impact on his own personal self-worth, right? And confidence, which then led to his job search, his mentoring, becoming a mentee. And so it's just an extraordinary set of opportunities. And I feel that SOF was probably one of the most important parts of his Brown experience. I mean, great friends, great classes, etc. But it was very fundamental and core to his development. So let's start with him. When I watched what you were doing as part of SOF and what the premise of SOF was all about, for me, it was pretty straightforward. It totally resonates with how I think about the world and how I hold myself, or try to hold myself, and the values that my wife and I have tried to deliver to our children across many aspects of whatever we do. And so it was just completely high resonance. So that was easy. And it's just the notion that somebody was identifying those values other than a parent, and then presenting opportunities for college students to access that and hear from professionals in industry around how their values impacted their own career and driving home importance of being an ethical person. It's just extraordinary.
Jamie, I wish we had an auditorium full of all of the parents of all of our Scholars of Finance members and candidates to hear that.
They're very lucky, those parents.
We are very lucky that they raise such wonderful young adults that align with this vision and these mission and these values that want to enter financial services as investors, as capital allocators, capital stewards and managers in all sorts of roles and do it the right way. Right? Helping others, making an impact, having integrity, having humility, being compassionate, striving for excellence every day. We're just so thrilled. I've got to say, I think Kobe, you give us a lot of credit. I do think Kobe, you raised him so well. And if he's listening to this, sorry, Kobe, to be talking about you publicly like this. I remember my first several conversations with him, like they were yesterday. I was always struck by his authenticity, his genuine curiosity, his humility comes through with so much resonance. It's so obvious that he's humble fundamentally. That all translates into just him being so grateful for your time, really wanting to learn from you, being so respectful and kind. Every single time you're on a call with Kobe, you feel like he values this. There's respect. He's listening. He's learning and it's impacting him. He's actually doing it and he's growing, right? It feels like a super high ROI, right? It feels like an exceptional ROI. So to pay him a little bit of compliment. And if Helene listens to this conversation, Helene, I hope I get to meet you in person one day. And thank you as well for playing your part in raising Kobe as well as you have. He's incredible. I'm really curious, Jamie. I won't keep gushing about Kobe, which I could just do for the rest of this conversation or this whole conversation, frankly. What sort of advice might you have for parents who might be listening to this conversation, who maybe have students in SOF? Who choose to listen to this. What advice do you have for them to help support their children, these young adults in getting into finance successfully, remaining true to themselves, to their mission, to their values? Any advice for the other parents out there who might have children, our donors, executives, or just parents of our students who might want to be helpful for their kids?
So look, you thanked Helene and she deserves much of the credit. But the reality is that we as parents need to create an environment where our kids learn by example how we lead our lives. So I think it starts with us, and everything that we do, we have to lead those highly ethical lives that you've just described, that you're trying to impart to the SOF community. And we need to, as parents, explain and bring our children into those dynamics or challenges that we have in our day-to-day lives so they can see how we are grappling with uncertainty, how we are managing through a tough situation, how we are practicing what we preach to our kids, because that's where they learn the most, when they see it. Then as they start this journey, I think the most important thing we have to do is really encourage their curiosity, really use the word listening is my father's favorite phrase. You got to listen because you cannot learn if you're not listening, if you're doing the talking. And we need to help them get prepared for this journey. Kobe would ask me for help before an interview and I'd say, okay, well, you have to do all the work first and then come and talk to me about it, right? What are your questions? What are you trying to seek from that discussion with that individual? What are your goals? Map it out. And then he'd have to come and fully have it prepared. And then I would ask, well, did you write a thank you letter? Not here's a draft thank you letter. Did you write a thank you letter? And, and we'd go through that whole process because you then institutionalize it. And I think we want to give them independence, but we also want to be highly supportive of their journey. And it's going to be hard. And then I think it's really important to recognize that there's going to be, I believe in failure, because it's out of failure that we learn the most. And so I prepare my kids for the word no, because we're going to get it a lot. And it's only what you do after the first no that really matters, and how you take from that and move forward and make yourself stronger and better. And so that's the other part, is really help them through the no phase.
I'm going to log that away for parenting advice for myself.
It works with your salespeople as well.
I was going to say that sounds like parenting advice from a sales leader. Listen, son, Every no is one step closer to the next yes. Insert Jim Rohn. You know, that's so funny.
My favorite interview question of every person I meet is, tell me when you failed. Give me an example of when you failed. What did you learn from it? And how did you change who you are as a person from that point forward? Or what did you change from that experience? And I listen intently to people's answers to that question.
Interesting. My struggle with that question always is there's so many examples. Like, where do I begin?
But you see, it's the rare person who's willing to say that, Ross. And frankly, that is pretty powerful right there because we all fail every single day.
I have so many stories that I would share. One last question. You and Kobe are very close. You spend a lot of time together. You've been pretty involved in SOF. HarbourVest hosted our last Boston leadership conference, a year ago, which you're very grateful for. And we're excited to see HarbourVest there as State Street hosts us in Boston this year and hopefully go back and HarbourVest's new office, the old State Street office, to host next year, perhaps. You've been a speaker, you've been involved in programs. You and I have spent a lot of time together. You've brought the firm to SOF or SOF to the firm, using your language earlier, really, in a way. I'm curious what advice you just might offer any of our students listening, how they can get the most out of SOF, how they can grow the most and set themselves up for success.
So look, I don't know the day-to-day actions of SOF on a college campus, but the more opportunities that the students within a chapter can create to engage with senior leaders in industry, the better. Because those are touch points that are huge learning experiences. The more that a student can take on a leadership role within the chapter, because again, through leadership, you learn so much about yourself, your peers, and what you're going to do. And it only enriches who you are as a person. Those are the two most important things. And then if you attend an event or participate in an event, you want to come prepared with a set of really critical questions that are important to you and not just superficial. You also want to find a way to follow up with whomever you're engaging, either if it's in person immediately at that session or afterwards on a direct basis, because that's the beginning of the networking process and it never ends and we have to do it all the time. So leadership opportunities within, take advantage and force opportunities for more and more connectivity with the outside world, and then really connect very directly with those speaking situations. Those would be three big things for me, Ross. Because, even that Northeast chapter, I was like, that event that we hosted, you could tell the students who were really engaged and wanted to engage with you, and you could tell the others that were sort of there for being there. And that automatic filtering just changes the game from that point forward.
If any of our students are listening to this, I really want them to hear this point. And this is even true for anybody in the industry. Like, I do a lot of speaking engagements, and I got to say, you can talk to 30 people to 100 people, and you leave the room, and there's like two, or there's like three or four that you're like, if they need anything, like, I just want to get them in my orbit. Like, I want to have a relationship with this future talent because one day I might want to hire them. It's the select few. I often tell the story about when I was interning at Piper Sandler, Andrew Duff, who was chairman and CEO of then Piper Jaffray for almost 20 years, came and gave his annual talk to the intern class. At the end of his talk, he says, if any of you ever want to chat, shoot me an email. And I was the one who did. And then I told my buddy who was also interning at Piper that I met with Andrew. He's like, really? I'm like, yeah, dude, send him an email and ask for a meeting. And he did, and he got a meeting too. And, now Andrew's been an advisor for 10 years and helped us form SOF from the very beginning. Piper is a founding partner, but I digress. Jamie, I got to say, this was just absolutely wonderful. What a great conversation. Thank you for sharing all of your wisdom, your insight. I'm confident anybody listening is going to get a lot of value out of this. You've given me a lot to think about. I've personally gotten a lot out of this conversation, and we'll look forward to listening to this and taking notes after the fact. So I want to thank you again for your support of our students, our mission of our organization. We're grateful to you and HarbourVest, Jacoby, and I'm excited to keep supporting him, in his future endeavors. Hopefully, we'd love to have you back on again in the future.
Ross, look, first off, thank you for everything you did for Kobe, but thank you for SOF because I think you're changing the future, and that's essential. And then thank you for you. I feel our partnership and connectivity runs deep. And that's very, very important to me. So I look forward to staying connected with you, regardless of Kobe graduating and leaving the ground. So You're not getting rid of me very easily, and I'm expecting that HarbourVest will have a long-standing partnership with you.
Thanks, Jamie. It really means a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Investing in Integrity by Scholars of Finance. I want to share a huge thank you to our advisors, directors, donors, team, and our members who make this all possible. If you liked this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you have any feedback for us, you can send it to hello@scholarsoffinance.org or by visiting our website. Until next time, please join us on our mission to inspire character and integrity in the finance leaders of tomorrow.